Good afternoon, everyone. It is Wednesday, January the 27th, 2021. It is currently 3:07 p.m. Central Time. I'm coming to you live from Victory Baptist Church located here in Ovalo, Texas. I apologize. I have to move the mic back up. There we go. All right. The mic was completely out of place. What had happened is I hit the big red go live button, and it just kept spinning and spinning and spinning. And I thought maybe the internet was down here at the church, which would be really bad. And so I had moved the mic. I did this. And I was looking like, okay, wait, is everything okay? And I was trying to check everything. Well, I think we're good. I think we're live on the air. So it says we're live. I'm going to check this really quick. I just want to make sure, because the last thing I would want to do is do an hour of teaching to only discover that I wasn't actually live on the air. Okay. That would be bad. All right. Yes. We are live on the air. Yes. Exercises of a Religious Person, Part 2. We are live on the air. Hopefully this is going to be beneficial. Hang on here. I've got some messages coming in. All right. Okay, here we go. Okay. There we go. I can't read all of those messages. Okay, here we go. So we're going to jump right in. I hope you're having a great day. We did discover something in our last live broadcast. We discovered that if you ever want to chat with me while I'm live on the air, yeah. Okay. Thank you, Will. Yes. Now we have the ability for someone to talk to me whenever you want. If you're listening to me via the Spreaker app, you can look there. There's a little like a chat icon. Click on that and you can send me any message, questions. I don't know if we should tell people that, because I think what's going to start happening is people are going to start sending me messages that are not very nice or polite. But hey, if you ever want to communicate with me now, you can chat with me while I'm live on the air, and we've got to find a way to utilize that. We got to find a way to make some good use of that. I'll come up with some ideas, but we're not here to talk about all of that. Right here next to me is a copy of the Imitation of Christ by Thomas à Kempis. We need to finish chapter 19 of book 1. And I'm hesitant to do this because we're kind of in a broken, the flow of this chapter has kind of been broken up, because I probably should have just worked. I should have probably have organized it better. That in our last episode, I just finished the whole chapter, but I did not. And that's my own fault. And now it's kind of like I got to try to find a way to put this back together and give you something that hopefully is beneficial. I'm going to do my very best. And the more I read chapter 19 again a little while ago, before I did the last live broadcast, I read it again. And then right there when I took a break between ones, I read it one more time. And there's no question that the only way to understand chapter 19 is you have to understand that he is definitely, there is no question in my mind. Thomas à Kempis wrote chapter 19 specifically for those, when he says a religious person, someone in a religious order, a monk, nun, someone in a religious order. That's the way we have to understand that. Now, how that translates to you and I in our everyday Christian life, that's the difficulty. So let's just establish something. Thomas à Kempis wants you and I to understand that in our Christian life, it requires what he refers to as exercises. We could call them spiritual exercises. We need spiritual exercises, or maybe we could use the term spiritual disciplines in our life if we are going to be mighty in virtue. In other words, we looked at those 4 cardinal virtues. If we're going to have those virtues and they're going to be strong in our life, they're going to be evident, they're going to be present, then we need these spiritual exercises. So here's what we need to attempt to do in this chapter. We need to identify which exercises he hints to or is very explicit about, and we have to understand what these exercises are. Now, then we could raise a question: are those actually a requirement? Are those actually necessary? This may be something where someone is just offering some spiritual wisdom, but we cannot say, hey, as a Christian, you must do this, because there's been lots of books written about spiritual disciplines. And there's a tendency that we're like, hey, these are the spiritual disciplines. If you don't do them, you're not even saved. We got to be careful not to go to that extreme. At the same time, sometimes the spiritual disciplines that's been suggested throughout church history, they all could prove to be very beneficial and may be very helpful for your Christian life and my Christian life. So we've got to identify what these exercises, these disciplines he seems to be putting forth are, figure out if they're biblical, and then there's some other principles I think we'll look at as well. But I'm just going to start right back at the beginning of the chapter and try to go through it, because I got to try to reestablish the flow and the connection here. And I'm going to have to rely, I think I'm going to rely on my other translation more so than the one I currently use, because I think this chapter really benefits from the other translation. But we'll do that when I feel it's necessary. So if you have a copy of The Imitation of Christ by Thomas à Kempis, chapter 19, book 1, this is a great time to open it up. If you don't have it, just listen. I'll do my best. In my poor reading ability, yes, I am the worst public reader in the history of mankind, all right? I should never be the one that takes people through books, all right? I need a co-host, and the co-host reads the section, and then I talk about the section. That's what I need to do. Yeah, because, there's a lot of reasons my public reading is bad, because I'm very good at basically speed reading, but speed reading does not translate to good public reading, because public reading, you got to read slow and you got to you got to just focus on each word. But I'm not focused on the word. I'm already focused like 6 minutes ahead about what I'm going to say, which leads to bad reading. I know that, but here we go. All right. You're stuck with me, right? That's what you get for free podcast, right? Okay, here we go. Exercises of a religious person. The life of a good religious person ought to be mighty in all virtues. We've already studied that. That he may inwardly be such as outwardly he seems to men. Now, I think this is a major theme Thomas à Kempis has in this chapter. He's really concerned that what we are inwardly is not what we appear to be outwardly, especially for religious persons, people who, a monk or a nun, they're known by the way they dress. They appear one way. And I think that we can ask ourselves as Christians, are we inwardly what we want everyone to see outwardly? We all want people to perceive a certain type of Christianity. If we're Christians, we want people to think a certain way about us. But does that really match what we are inwardly? Let me ask this question. Right now, I know I'm going to mess up here, and I don't want to take a detour, but I think this is an important spiritual detour. I was thinking about this earlier today. In fact, I was going to come out to church today and just do a special kind of episode to throw out this thought. But I think it's going to fit with this chapter. So I'm just going to ask you this question. Do you think as Christians, that we have a tendency to overcompensate for, do we think, how do I want to put this? Do you think we have a tendency as Christians to put forth a outward type of holiness and godliness? In other words, by what we say, by what we do, by what we condemn, that we come out really strong outwardly saying that's wrong and that's sinful and that's wrong. And that sometimes those who come out the strongest and the loudest and want to put forth the loudest display of holiness, do you think people are doing that to simply overcompensate for an inward corruption? Do you think we try to cover up an inward corruption by an external godliness? Do you think we have a tendency to do that? I know, and I cannot speak about this. I'm not saying this in any dogmatic way. I'm just calling this into question. I want us to think about this. All right, that's the whole beauty of reading these classic books, is they bring up these concepts that we can really try to struggle with and think about and meditate on. All right, and I'll try to tie this back into the book, so just stay with me. Here's an example. When I first walked into an independent fundamental Baptist church, the first one I ever walked into was in Germany, but that was just there because I was there for the military. And I kind of saw this a little bit, but I really for the first time, it really became like very evident to me when I walked into an independent fundamental Baptist church in Papillion, Nebraska. And there was this external godliness. All the men had short hair. They wore a shirt and a tie. The women all had, long dresses. And in many cases, none of them had short hair, minimal makeup. And they all spoke, about righteousness and godliness. And it all had such a beautiful external display of godliness and holiness. And they would talk about all the things that, how bad the world was. And they condemned how women dressed and how men would dress and how kids acted and about music and about movies. And they condemned and they condemned everything. And they were loud. And they made this display of this godliness was very loud. But the longer I was there, you would witness the internal corruption. Pride, arrogance, selfishness, backbiting, gossip, slander, doing things through strife and vainglory. It was like a lot of ugliness inside. Now, externally, it looked good. And yes, many of them weren't having, many of them did not have some sin problems that maybe other people had externally, but there was a lot of internal corruption. And you saw it after you got past that exterior of godliness. And I wonder if we have a tendency that when we are struggling with something internally, we overcompensate by putting forth this image. Look at how godly I am. Look at how godly I am. Look at how, I condemn that. I hate that. I hate that. And the more we express that, what we're really doing is simply trying to hide the fact that inside, man, there's some garbage here, but I'm going to really overcompensate by condemning that. So maybe it's those who are the loudest in condemning everyone else are the ones who they have the most to hide. I don't know. I just think there may be something to that. But Thomas à Kempis is really concerned. He wants the internal and the external to match. And I think that's what we always have to ask ourselves. It's so easy to clean up the outside. It really is. Everyone can pull that off. It's what's underneath. And I think it's the same thing. Basically, it's what Adam and Eve did, right? They knew that they knew they'd messed up, and they covered themselves with fig leaves. We cover ourselves with an external form of godliness to hide the internal corruption because we don't want anyone to see the internal corruption. And the way we play it off is by acting like we're so godly by the way we speak and all the other people we condemn. And look how godly I am. I condemn everyone. But maybe what you're really doing is just overcompensating and hiding from what you really are. I don't know. You can tell me your thoughts about that. I'll throw that in there. We'll see if that comes back into play here. All right. So let's read this again. The life of a good religious person ought to be mighty in all virtues, that he may inwardly be such as outwardly he seems to men. And please note what Thomas à Kempis is saying is that we need these virtues in order to be inwardly what we want to appear to be outwardly. That the way to be inwardly what we want to appear to be outwardly is the presence of these virtues. These virtues are an internal thing that has to be there. And you can go back and review those 4 cardinal virtues. And I think there's a lot to that. He goes on, and with reason, there ought to be much more within than is perceived without. There should be more in us than that is seen from without. For God beholds us, who we are bound most highly to reverence, wherever we are, and to walk in purity like angels in his sight. Now, so that's his basic thesis. This is what we should strive to be. We should strive to be inwardly what we want to appear to be outwardly. I think we need to acknowledge that at times I think we overcompensate with the outward to cover up the inward. I think I'm onto something there. I could be wrong, but I think we've all done that to some level. I think we've all done that. I know when I first became a Christian as a teenager, I was really good at cleaning up that outside. I don't drink anymore. I don't sell drugs anymore. Look at me. And I learned really quick that, I condemn this and I condemn that and I condemn this. But in many cases, I think I was doing that to cover up some of the internal things that were going on and struggles and lust and things I was struggling with as a teenage boy. I think there's something to that. I could be wrong. All right, here we go. We ought daily to renew our purpose and to stir up ourselves to fervor as though we had for the first time today entered the Christian life, and to say, help me, O Lord God, in this my good purpose and in thy holy service, and grant that I may now this day begin perfectly for that which I have done hitherto is as nothing. So this seems to be, the second paragraph here seems to be really the first spiritual exercise, that he wants us to exercise ourselves each day to renew our purpose and to stir up a fervor in us. Now, the hard part is this, to me, is so vague. How do I do that? How do I renew myself each day? How do I stir up that fervor as if this is the first day of my Christian life? I don't know how you pull that off. So I know this is kind of like what he would lay down as the first spiritual exercise, but he doesn't articulate how I do it. So I'm going to just throw this one aside. I mean, I can sit there and tell everyone, hey, this is what you need to do every day. You need to renew your purpose and stir up your spiritual fervor. I can tell you to do that, but you could email me and say, how do I do that? And I wouldn't know. How do you do that? Drink a 5-hour energy and slap yourself in the face 3 times. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. So we're just going to throw that one aside. Now, continue. After that paragraph, he starts with this. According to our purpose shall be the course of our spiritual profiting, and much diligence is necessary to him who will profit much. Now, last time we talked about this statement. I'm going to read it from a different translation. All right. He says here, I'm going to go back and read this. We ought daily to renew our vows and to kindle our hearts to zeal. Now, that makes a little bit more sense. For those who enter into a religious order, they take vows. So this seems to be saying that what they need to do each day is to renew their vows that they made when they became a monk or a nun, and renew that. Okay? I don't know how we translate that to us. He says, and to kindle our hearts to zeal, as if each day were the first day of our conversion, and to say, help me, O God, in my good resolutions and in thy holy service, and grant that this day I may make a good beginning, for hitherto I have done nothing. Now, we could argue that it's a good spiritual discipline to forget about our past failures and our past victories and start each day new. I think that there is something to that. All right, but let's continue. Now, he continues with this. According to our resolution, so is the rate of our progress, and much diligence is needful for him who would make good progress. So he's basically saying if we're going to accomplish anything in our spiritual life, it's going to be connected to your resolution and how dedicated you are. All right. Still not a specific exercise, but all right, let's continue. For if he who resolveth bravely oftentimes falleth short, how shall it be with him who resolveth rarely or feebly? In other words, if those who truly dedicate themselves fall short, then how short are you going to fall if you never dedicate yourself? You don't, have any resolution to accomplish anything. He goes, but manifold causes bring about abandonment of our resolution. Yet a trivial omission of holy exercises can hardly be made without some loss to us. When we omit holy exercises, we're going to lose something. All right? The resolution of the righteous dependeth more upon the grace of God than upon their own wisdom. For in him they always put their trust, whatsoever they take in hand. For man proposeth, but God disposeth, and the way of man is not in himself. All right, let's continue. If a holy exercise be sometimes omitted for the sake of some act of piety or of some brotherly kindness, it can easily be taken up afterwards. But if it be neglected through distaste or slothfulness, then it is sinful, and the mischief will be felt. Strive as earnestly as we may, we shall still fall short in many things. Always should some distinct resolution be made by us, and most of all, we must strive against those sins which most easily beset us. Both our outer and inner life should be straightly examined and ruled by us, because both have to do with our progress. All right, now, he talks about when can you put off these spiritual exercises. You can put off spiritual exercises when you're doing good, but if you're just doing it because you're lazy and you're slothful, well, then it's gonna hurt you. And that we have to commit ourselves to these exercises. We have to strive and again, we've got to examine our outer and inner life should be straightly examined and ruled by us. We have to look at our inner and we have to look at our outer life, and we have to examine it and try to rule it, to try to do something with it. Now, again, I wish you would just like list these exercises in some meaningful way, because some of these, again, are so vague. Examine your inner life. I will say that that's a spiritual exercise that we must, I think that's an exercise we can all adopt. Right? I think that's one that we can all try to put forth. We have to be examining what is true of us internally. We're so focused on behavioral modification. Modify my behavior so externally I look good. Behavioral modification is not true behavioral modification if it doesn't go to the inward reality and the inward attitude and the inward desire and the inward problem. We have to deal with what's inside of us. And we're so focused on, as long as I stay away from that external behavior, I'm okay. You're okay for a while, but sooner or later that internal problem is going to manifest itself and show itself, and then you end up in a major problem, and then you fall. All right, so all right, I think that's something that I think if we look at these two exercises, here are the two exercises I'm going to give us. Number one, we got to forget our past victories and our past failures and begin each day anew. I mean, look, it doesn't matter what you did before. Either way, good or bad, you can't live off your success, and you can't just stay defeated because of your failure. You got to start each day anew. I think that's something we can do. And number two, we have to examine our internal and external life to see if they match and see what's really going on. So we forget the good and the bad of the past, and we start over and we examine our lives internally and externally. Right? I think that's really good. Now, he goes on. I'm going to stay with this translation. If thou canst not be always examining thyself, thou canst at certain seasons, and at least twice in the day, at evening and at morning. All right, now I'm going to change up the way this is written and so that it makes a little bit more sense. I don't like the word canst. I don't like that. So if you cannot be always examining yourself, if you cannot always be examining yourself, you can at certain seasons and at least twice in the day, at evening and at morning. So he is arguing that this examination we're supposed to be done should occur 2 times a day. Should occur in the morning, should occur in the evening. Should occur in the morning and the evening. Now, I will argue that if you're really going to examine yourself, I'm going to argue any meaningful self-examination, I'll state it this way. Any self-examination is only meaningful if you write it down. I think you have to take the time to think about, examining your attitudes, your desires, what you're feeling, and you got to write it down, because when you write it down, you can look at it, you can see it. Now, you may want to tear up the page and burn it as soon as you're done, and that's perfectly okay. But I think writing it down forces you to really spend the time thinking about it. Right? Now, of course, in a monastery, they've got that time. Now, for you to make that time in the morning and the evening for self-examination may require a little bit of discipline, but you could probably pull it off, and we probably would all be better for it. So he goes, if you can't examine yourself always, then examine yourself at least twice in the day, the evening and the morning. In the morning, make thy resolves. In the evening, inquire into thy life, how thou hast sped today in the word, deed, and thought. For in these ways thou hast often perchance offended God and thy neighbor. So this is what he states you do. In the morning, you make your resolves. In the morning, you write down, these are the things I resolved to do today. These are the things I resolved not to do. These are you make your resolutions of what you're going to try to accomplish that day, inwardly and outwardly. Remember, both. He wants that balance. And then in the evening, you look into your life to see how you've spent the day in the word, in deed, and in thought. Now, again, he's talking about those in a monastery. Right? I mean, they spend a good portion of the day in the word. They have certain deeds they have to do, certain chores they have to do, and they spend a lot of time doing a lot of thinking. They have times of spiritual reading, just sitting in a room by themselves, just reading with a notebook. For your life, you start your day going, here are my resolutions for the day, and then you end your day going, okay, you could look at those resolutions. How did you do those? How did you do those resolutions, not only externally, but internally? All right. I think we can see that. All right. He goes, gird up thy loins like a man against the assaults of the devil. Bridle thine appetite, and thou wilt soon be able to bridle every inclination of the flesh. Be thou never without something to do. Be reading or writing or praying or meditating or doing something that is useful to the community. Bodily exercises, however, must be undertaken with discretion, nor are they to be used by all alike. All right, that's some interesting stuff here. So let's consider this. So we need to start each day with forgetting the past and good or bad. All right, we need to do that. We must be examining ourselves. We must examine ourselves internally and externally. He gave us some directions on how to do this twice a day. You can figure out how to do this. And then he throws in a lot of things here. Bridle thine appetite, and thou will soon be able to bridle every inclination. This is about disciplining your appetites, controlling your desires. And again, I've stated it so many times, the only way, I think the one thing Christianity has given us to try to combat our appetites is fasting. It's the most unpleasant thing because the desire for food is a natural desire. For you to deny that desire, that natural desire, to then focus on something spiritual, goes against everything inside of you, goes against everything that you want. And if you can bridle that appetite, then I think it gives you the ability to bridle other appetites. That's the theory. I don't think many Christians put it into practice, but it's something that we should all strive to do. And it's hard to do. I mean, if you've ever been hungry, you know it's hard to do. And then this is interesting. Never be without something to do. Never be without something to do. That seems like such a whoa. We pulled up this ancient Christian book, okay, that's considered a Christian classic, and the great wisdom he gives us is never be without something to do. This is where I have a hard time relating to. There are people who talk about being bored, and I can honestly say this. I know when I say this, people roll their eyes and they don't believe it, but I can honestly look at you. I don't know what boredom is. I have never been bored for 1 second of my entire life. My problem is I don't have enough hours in a day. Even when I do one of those times where I go days without sleep, and the reason I go days without sleep is because there's always so much I want to do. There are books I want to read. There's music I want to listen to. There's movies I want to watch. There's TV shows I want to watch. There's Bible study. There's sermons to listen to. There's podcasts to listen to. There's so much to do. I've always been like, oh, I want to do that. Oh, I could do this. Now, my problem is structuring my day so that I can get the most out of every second of every hour. There's always so much I want to do. And so when people say boredom, I know that, it's often said that, idle hands or the devil's tools. I can't remember the way that statement goes. I don't want to say it in an incorrect way, but you get the idea that idle hands are dangerous. Boredom is a dangerous thing. So he's like, don't be bored. Don't be, always have something to do. And he gives you a list of things to do. His things are reading, writing. Again, that writing is such, think about this. And I always find it interesting. I look, monks and monasteries has always been a fascinating thing to me. It always has. So I've watched documentaries, read books about it. I've read, manuals about, hey, here's how this order works. Here's all the rules. I've talked to monks whenever I get the chance. When I was trying to learn how to do the Liturgy of the Hours, I called a monastery and talked to a monk. Whenever they fascinate me just because of that rigid, how much they sacrifice to be there. I obviously don't agree with their theology, but there's just something about it. So I just find it funny that they're sitting in a monastery. In many cases, that's going to be there. That's where they're going to live. That's where they're going to die. So why would you take time to be sitting in a room writing? But who's going to see what you're writing? Who cares? You write for yourself. And this, it's so important. The pencil is the best eye that you have. The pencil sees more than you see. When you don't write, you don't see. Now, I think sitting and writing is a good way. Now, if you don't do that, here's what I would say. If you don't write, talk to yourself. I know that sounds like crazy talk. I'm going to do so because when you're like, I'll be here at the church and I'll spend time walking up and down the center aisle here between the pews and I'll just talk out loud. But I'll talk out loud about whatever is truly going on inside, feelings, thoughts. And then that's when you can really hear yourself say what's really there. Sometimes we need to be engaged in that kind of writing, talking out, because remember, what's his whole point here? All of these exercises are about making sure the internal matches the external. You got to get what's inside of you out, either speaking it or on paper. You got to get it out, whatever it is, no matter how ugly, no matter how messed up it is, it's got to get out. We sometimes want to, we don't even want to see what's on the inside. We want to keep ourselves from seeing it. We spend forever keeping everyone else from seeing it, but we know it's there. So we've got to, in a sense, we've got to bring it out so that we see it, that we are confronted by it. Because as long as we keep it inside, then we're in trouble. We live a self-deceived life. I think we often talk about hypocrisy, and hypocrisy is when we do things, we do things inconsistent with what we claim we believe in front of other people. But I think the greatest hypocrisy happens with ourselves. We act in a way that's not consistent with what we know is inside of us. We speak in a way that's not consistent with what's inside of us. So we put on a mask to ourselves. We do it so not only to deceive other people, I think we do so to deceive our very selves. That's why the Bible says it's the human heart that is deceitful above all things. We deceive ourselves. So I think we have to he doesn't want you to be idle. He wants you to be engaged in meaningful activity, which is reading or writing. And I think the writing is so important. It's for you to get what's inside of you, outside of you, so that you can see it, so you can look at it. Think of it this way. I'll use a medical idea. When they find something inside of you, like a tumor or something there, they're like, hey, there's something inside of you. They sometimes have to go in to take out a part of it, maybe a biopsy, so that they can test it to see what it is. They can see it inside of you, but they're like, we've got to bring it out so that we can test it. You're going to get what's inside of you, outside of you, so that in a sense you can test it to see how cancerous it really is. That doesn't, that doesn't mean you're never going to sin. Doesn't mean like all of a sudden now, woohoo, this is the way to never sin. I'm not saying it's the way to never sin because you're always going to sin, but it's at least you're sinning and being more honest and being open with, what you're doing and you can deal with it, hopefully. All right. So he goes, never be without something to do, reading or writing or praying or meditating or doing something that is useful to the community. And the community there he's referring to is the community of the monastery or wherever, whatever religious order you're in. For us, always doing something that's useful to the community. Do something that's useful to the kingdom of God. Do something that's useful to your church. Do something that's useful for a ministry. Do something that's useful. Now, this is interesting. Bodily exercise, however, must be undertaken with discretion. Nor are they to be used by all alike. Now, when he says bodily exercises, I don't think he's referring to physical exercises. I think he's referring to those spiritual exercises that we do with our body must be undertaken with discretion, nor are they to be used by all alike. I think, in other words, not everyone's going to use the same exercise. It just seems weird that would be referring to like physical exercise. That's an interesting line there. Let's go. We got to finish this up because we're going to run out of time. Okay, we got to finish this chapter. Next paragraph. The duties which are not common to all must not be done openly, but are safest carried out in secret. The duties which are not common to all must not be done openly, but are safest carried out in secret. Now, I think the duties he's referring to here, I'm going to pull up my other translation. The other translation, this other translation says, the exercises which are not common are not to be exposed to public view, for they are private and are practiced more safely at home. So I think what he is saying here is that these spiritual exercises that we're engaged in, whether it's forgetting everything that's left behind, whether it's the self-examination, whether it's the not making sure you're doing something like reading. I think what he's saying is that we don't do these spiritual exercises to be exposed to public view. For these things are private and are practiced more safely at home. Is he saying that these are things that we don't put on a public display to let everyone know that we're doing them? It's kind of an interesting. It's interesting the way it's written. He goes, nevertheless, you must beware that you are not slack in those which are common, and more ready for those which concern yourself only. But having fully and faithfully accomplished all which you are bound and enjoined to do, if you have any spare time, do as your devotion shall desire. So I think what he is saying, what he's saying, is that you have to develop some spiritual exercises. You have to develop them, and they're not going to be the same for everyone. They're going to be different because you've got your own circumstances and situations. And what you have to do is you've got to do these, and you don't always run around whatever those spiritual exercises are. You've got, for example, my spiritual exercise that I do a lot is talking out loud to myself. I'm not going to do that in public, okay? So I'm going to do that in private. And I'm not going to say that everyone else needs to do the exact same thing. Now you've got to figure out what to do to get what's inside of you outside of you. So I think that's what he appears to be saying. And then he goes on. All cannot use one kind of spiritual exercise. All right, we agree with that. All cannot use one kind of spiritual exercise, but one is more useful to this person, another for that. In the time of temptation, we have need of some, and have other times of peace and quietness. Some we like to have in mind when we are sad, and others when we rejoice in the Lord. In other words, you can't always come along and look at everyone and say, here is the spiritual exercise you must engage in, and this is the way you have to do it. There are different ones for different people, and you need different ones for different situations. Under times of great temptation, you need some. When you're sad, you need different ones, and you need different ones. Now, he doesn't do a good job of outlining these. And I think probably the problem we have here is not a translation issue. It's that he is writing probably to monks who probably understand what he's talking about, and we don't have that context. We don't have that context of what they did in his religious order. We don't know. And I think, I'd have to go look at his religious order. I don't think they took vows the same way other monasteries did and other monks did. I think there was something different about his order, but I don't remember the top of my head. So what can we gain from this? Well, let's just do a couple of things. Let's try to wrap this up. What can we take from this? Here are some basic lessons I will give you. Number one, you and I need to put into practice the idea of forgetting each day all the good that we've done in our spiritual life and all the bad. For some of you, it's probably going to be more of a struggle to forget the good. For some of you, it may be more of a struggle to forget the bad. I have a tendency to remember every bad thing I've ever done and every failure I've ever done as a Christian far more than any victories or good things I've done. I remember the bad. It's this weird, it's a psychological thing that happens to me. I hate it, but it happens to me. Every time I take a shower, my mind immediately is hit with every failure I've ever made as a Christian. It's like clockwork. And I take at least 2 showers a day because I like to be clean, all right? So, but every time I take a shower, it's like for 15 minutes, it's like boom, 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 boom. Remember that mistake? Remember that mistake? Remember that mistake? I hate it. It's horrible. It's horrible. In some ways, I hate it. In some ways, I like it because it reminds me that I'm never as spiritual as I think that I am. So maybe I hate it. Maybe I like it. But guess what? At some point, you got to say, I cannot go back and change one thing that I've ever done. I can't fix it. All I can do is worry about today. For others, maybe you love about all of the spiritual victories that you have and you're preoccupied with that. We all have to put those aside. We all have to do that. I think we can all agree that's an important spiritual discipline. Forget the past and let's move forward. Number 2, we need to spend time examining ourselves. We have to spend time examining ourselves, the internal and the external. And we've got to come up with a means of getting what's inside outside so that we can look at it and we are confronted with the reality of it. And we've got to be honest with it, whether it's writing or talking. All right. Number 3, I'm going to put this as a spiritual discipline, and I'm hesitant to do this because this one I don't really feel this one applies to me, but we need to be on the lookout for idleness. If you ever use the word bored, if that is a something you experience, if that's a feeling that you have, please feel free to contact me and tell me what it feels like, but avoid it. Avoid it. Fill that time with something meaningful and useful. And my thing is even things that people feel are not useful can be useful depending on how you engage it. It can be entertaining. It can be fun. It can bring a pleasure. But even in things that are pleasurable, you can analyze and think and discuss and talk. And it can be. I mean, the other day I had a 45-minute conversation about a wrestling storyline. Taking it apart and analyzing it. That's engaging the brain, the mind, analytical skills, interpretive skills. I mean, that's using a lot of things. There's just so much to do in life, to enjoy, just don't find yourself bored and idle. Because I think boredom tends to lead people to possible spiritual problems. I think it can. I don't know. Now, it doesn't mean I've never been bored, but I've found myself in spiritual problems. So it's not like some guarantee. All right. And then, I'll stop right there. I'll just stop right there. I'll stop right there. There we go. That concludes chapter 19 of Thomas à Kempis, Exercises of a Religious Person. The next chapter is A Love of Solitude and Silence. That's going to be interesting. I will just end with this. Thomas à Kempis in chapter 19, he really wants us to get the internal and the external on the same page. He wants the two to be in balance, to be, and he really says that there should be more on the inside than, and so really it's almost calling for an imbalance. He wants the internal to be better than the external. But let me ask you this question, and again, I maybe you don't think this is an important question, but I want you to ask yourself, do you feel you've ever overcompensated by trying to put forth an external righteousness that was simply there to cover up the internal corruption? Do you ever believe that you put forth an external righteousness to cover up internal corruption? You speak loudly condemning something, but you're only doing that to cover up what's really there. Is our condemnation simply a disguise? Is our judging simply a disguise? I mean, I've seen Christian men who like, and I can't say this always happens, but I'll give you an example. I remember, because nobody knows this person, so I won't say the person's name, but there was an individual who was in the military. And we had for a while kind of this email chat group with the base chaplain and a number of men who were Christians, and it went really good. And then someone in the email group then tried to get the chaplain in trouble for trying to say he was shoving his religion down our throat. But it was everyone in the email group agreed to be a part of the email group. So it turned into a big thing. But this individual, we all arrived at work that morning, and about 8 o'clock in the morning, the first email came to the group, and it was this individual going, I am so mad. I'm so furious. I was driving to work today, and I remember driving past it. It was connected right next to a motel. It's this big billboard, and I don't remember what it was advertising, but there was on this billboard was this woman not wearing very many clothes. She was not nude, but she definitely was not wearing a lot of clothes. And I remember looking over and seeing it going, wow, that'll catch your attention at 7 o'clock in the morning on the way to the military base. Like, where did that come from? And I moved on. I drove past it and went on with my life. Didn't give it much thought. But this man, he went crazy. He wanted to find out the name of the company. He wanted the billboard taken down. He believed it was, it was a crime. It was indecent. It was immoral. It was ungodly. It was wrong. It's flaunting worldliness. And he just went on and on and on and on and on about how ungodly and how ungodly and how ungodly it was. And he was furious. He wanted to call the news. He wanted to get a protest. I was like, why are you so upset? Like, what is going on? Now, it took a little while, but at some point, it finally, I think he acknowledged it or he ended up in some kind of trouble. I can't remember exactly what happened, but he had a massive problem with pornography. So was his external condemnation of that sign, was it a cover? Couldn't he just have said, man, guys, I saw that billboard and it caused me so many problems today. I'm going to need you to pray for me. Guys, I'm going to have problems. It gave me lust and I'm going to have trouble controlling it. I've got a major problem. But we don't typically approach things that way. I guess the most powerful story, I'll end with this, that I ever heard. I know I was going to end with the other story, but I'll tell this one as well. Because I just think there's something to this and what Thomas Kempis is trying to say, the internal and the external. I think there's something there that we really need to explore. But I'll remember this story. There was an individual, he walked into a gas station. And the gas station that he always gets gas is gas station / convenience store. He always walked into this gas station, and that's where he'd gotten gas, knew everyone there, and been going there for years. But they had started selling pornographic magazines. I don't remember. This was in the 90s, I believe. I think it was in the 90s. I don't remember what year it was. And he saw the pornographic magazines, and he was like, oh, man. So the manager was there, and he's just like, hey, I just want you to know I won't be coming back to this store anymore. And they said, why? And he said, because of the pornographic magazines. It's like, oh, you're offended by them? They make you mad. It's like, no. I'm not offended by them at all. The problem is I want to buy them. I'm going to be tempted to buy them. I just can't do this. If I come here, I'm going to end up buying it. And I don't want to do that because I know I shouldn't. That to me always impacted me because it was so honest. It wasn't like, hey, this offends me. This is horrible. I think sometimes we put forth such an external display of righteousness to cover up internal corruption. And the internal's got to be more than the external. So we got to get the internal out so that we see it and acknowledge it and acknowledge what is really there and work on that. And it looks like spiritual exercises may be necessary in order to try to accomplish that. You can give me your thoughts, newsif@yahoo.com, newsif@yahoo.com, newsif@yahoo.com. I hope we put that chapter back together and took it apart in a way that was beneficial to you. But that is chapter 19. Next chapter is chapter 20. Again, it will be on love of solitude and silence. There you go. Thanks for listening. Everyone have a great day. Can't wait to see your comments on it. God bless.